Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are taking a fascinating detour from the usual worlds of macroeconomics and silicon
It's a
chips.
different change of pace.
The huge change of pace. We are diving headfirst into, I think, the oldest battleground on the planet, the 64 squares of the chessboard.
Absolutely.
Specifically, we're dissecting the Italian opening, or what classical masters called the giuoco piano. This is an opening that is, it's simultaneously foundational, aggressive, and sometimes just downright brutal in its execution.
It truly is a perfect subject for a deep dive
Yeah.
because it's so much more than just the first three moves. The Italian opening, which for everyone listening is the sequence 1, E4, E5, 2, NF3, NC6, 3.
Yep.
BC4 is really an entry point into controlled risk.
Controlled risk. I like that.
Yeah, and our mission today is pretty comprehensive. We need to unpack its profound historical weight. It's been continuously analyzed for nearly 5 centuries.
5 centuries. That's incredible.
It is. We also need to look at its core, unwavering strategic goals, which are almost always centered on attacking the king side. And critically, the explosive, high-risk tactical traps. We're going to dissect specific sequences, including the infamous fried liver attack.
Which has maybe the best name in all of chess.
It really does. And we'll also cover a shocking forced checkmate that Black can deliver in just 7 moves designed to catch even, experienced players completely off guard.
So we have compiled some incredibly detailed source material here. We're focusing not just on the strategic philosophy like White's commitment to central control and rapid development, but also on specific game analyses, historical background from encyclopedic sources, and detailed move-by-move instructions for several high-stakes gambits.
Right.
The idea is that you, the listener, are going to walk away understanding not just what the moves are, but why they work, and what compensation truly means in a dynamic, open game.
That's the key. This isn't about learning a quiet, passive opening.
Not at all. This is about learning how to seize the initiative and just fight relentlessly for move 3.
That's the core takeaway, really. We're exploring this concept of compensation and the dramatic value shift that happens when you strategically sacrifice a piece to expose the enemy king. For anyone looking to dramatically inject tactical fire, and more importantly, tactical understanding into your repertoire, this deep dive is going to be invaluable for developing pattern recognition and, accepting those calculated risks we mentioned.
Okay, let's unpack this and start with the foundation itself. The core of the opening is incredibly elegant. 1, E4, E5, 2, NF3, NC6, 3, BC4. It's simple, it's principled, it's efficient. But what truly defines the Italian opening, and why has it remained a standard fixture in chess at every level for so long?
Well, the defining move, the one that gives the opening its entire character, is absolutely 3 BC4.
The bishop move.
The bishop move. It achieves immediate development, which is great, but more importantly, it immediately places that light-squared bishop, what people call the Italian bishop,
Yeah.
on the diagonal that points directly at the F7 square.
And F7 is the weak spot.
It's the weak spot. This is the crucial strategic insight that has persisted for centuries. The F7 square is universally recognized as the weakest point in Black's starting position because, well, it's protected only by the king. The bishop on C4 instantly applies pressure there, anticipating a future sacrifice or some kind of quick attack.
So from the very beginning, White is basically telegraphing an aggressive attacking intent. It's making a long-term commitment to focusing on that one single vulnerable spot. It feels like a psychological commitment as much as a positional one.
Precisely. The Italian opening is inherently an attacking game. It aims to exploit that F7 weakness and often involves attacking maneuvers and, crucially, material sacrifices pawns or even minor pieces to gain the initiative or accelerate the attack on the king.
The goal being.
The goal is simple. If you can force the enemy king to move, your position is overwhelmingly superior, often regardless of the material balance on the board.
And we aren't talking about some modern engine invention, are we? When we look at the source material, the history of this opening is just astounding. We are talking centuries.
Oh, absolutely. It is one of the most historically significant and oldest recorded openings. Its ancestry stretches back so far it appears in the famous Göttingen manuscripts from the late 15th century.
Wow.
Yeah, and its formal development really traces through 16th century Italian masters like Pedro Damiano and Giulio Palerio, who analyzed these initial moves extensively.
I find it fascinating how the main lines we're going to analyze today were already being codified 400 years ago.
They were. The major classical continuation, the giuoco piano, was essentially established by the Italian master Gioacchino Greco around 1620.
Greco.
Greco was a phenomenal player who documented these highly aggressive tactical wins, and many of his variations focusing on exploiting f7, are still found in modern tournament play. The depth of analysis is truly remarkable.
So grandmasters today are still playing ideas from the 1600s.
They are. The fact that top grandmasters still play lines established by Greco speaks volumes about the opening's strategic soundness and its tactical depth. We are talking about centuries of continuous, deep analysis that have just confirmed its viability over and over.
For those of us who track these things, the Italian opening family is classified by the Encyclopedia of Chess Openings, or ECO, under the range C50, C59. That's a pretty significant range. What does that tell us about the opening family?
That wide range signals that the Italian opening is not, a single prescribed sequence,
Yeah.
but a family of related strategic structures. It requires understanding different strategic plans.
Okay, so it's flexible.
Very. C50 through C54 cover the Gioco piano variations, literally the quiet game, where black typically responds symmetrically with 3-point BC5.
Right.
Then C55 through C59 covered the two knights defense, which is 3-point NF6. And that, as we'll explore later, leads to much sharper, more complex, and immediate tactical fights, often involving immediate material sacrifices.
But the common thread is always that bishop on c4.
The common thread across all these codes remains White's desire to capitalize on the powerful positioning of that light-squared bishop on c4. It's all about f7.
Let's focus now on that classical response, the Gioco piano itself, where black answers 3-point BC5. This kind of mirrors White's development, right? Developing the dark-squared bishop, also aiming for a key diagonal, getting ready to castle.
Yes, 3-point BC5 is the classical, most principled response. It develops a piece, it controls the d4 square, and it prepares for castling. From here, White has several strategic paths, but the sources really emphasize the traditional, ambitious main setup, the one Greco documented, 4c3.
Wait, 4c3. It looks like such a slow pawn move. You're delaying the development of your queen's knight. You're slowing down castling. Why is this specific prophylactic move so critical in what's supposed to be an aggressive opening?
That is a critical question, and it's because 4c3 is played almost exclusively to prepare the eventual central and explosive pawn push, d4.
Ah, so it's a setup move.
It's a total setup move. White's goal is profoundly ambitious, to establish the ideal center structure, with pawns on e4 and d4, and decisively shatter black central control.
You're willing to wait a turn.
White accepts that this setup often sacrifices immediate piece development, perhaps delaying castling or the b1 knight, precisely because central control is viewed as a greater long-term asset than immediate material or minor piece development. It's a pure, long-term strategic commitment to dominating the middle of the board.
So how does that plan usually unfold if black plays a standard sound developing move like 4-point NF6?
If black plays 4 NS6, complete in development and attacking the e4 pawn, White continues immediately with the central thrust 5 d4. This forces the issue.
No more waiting.
No more waiting. White is offering a pawn, essentially challenging black to deal with this overwhelming central presence. The most common and principled continuation for black is to exchange pawns, 5 don against d4.
And White uses that c-pawn that was prepared on move 4 to regain control.
Exactly. White recaptures with 6 c against d4. Now, White has achieved this beautiful, centralized d4-e4 pawn structure that was the goal of the entire setup. This gives White massive space advantages and control over key squares.
But black isn't just sitting back and letting this happen.
Not at all. Black isn't passive. Black must immediately generate counterplay, often utilizing the bishop that was placed on c5. The immediate threat comes after 6-point bb4 plus Mackey, checking the king.
This is where it gets really interesting. White achieved the ideal center, but the king is still technically exposed, and black is generating immediate threats on the queen's side. This sounds like it requires some serious calculation, not just positional understanding.
It is a razor's edge, a prime example of dynamic equilibrium. If White blocks the check with 7 and c3, black immediately capitalizes on the pressure against this centralized structure by taking the e4 pawn, 7-point m by c4.
So White loses a pawn.
White has now lost a pawn, but the sources are very clear. This leads to tremendously dangerous and complex complications where White has full compensation for the sacrificed material.
We can't just stop there and say tremendously dangerous complications. For the learner, we need to know what that compensation looks like. Why is losing a central pawn here okay for White?
That's the core insight of this entire line. White sacrifices the pawn but gains 3 things that are far more valuable in the long run.
Okay, what are they?
First, rapid development and tempo. White can castle immediately 0-0 and bring the rook to the now open e-file, often attacking that e4 knight or preparing a d5 pawn push.
I see.
Second, you have long diagonal control. The bishop on c4, which is no longer restricted by black's center, is an absolute monster, putting huge pressure on f7 and d5.
Then the third.
Third is just disruption. The e4 knight is often unstable. If black tries to defend it, they further delay their own development. The primary compensation is that white converts the material deficit into a huge lead in initiative and development, making the position incredibly uncomfortable for black.
So black is up a pawn, but their pieces are all tangled up just trying to defend against threats.
Exactly. So even the classical quiet game continuation quickly leaves the realm of placidity and becomes a battle over whether white's dynamic compensation, that is, control and tempo, is sufficient to overwhelm black's static material advantage.
It's a foundational lesson for any learner, then. Sometimes compensation is more valuable than material equality, particularly when the king is the ultimate target.
Absolutely. And the sheer depth of this line is why it endures. White is willing to cede material or delay development for that positional edge and that initiative in the center.
We've looked at the classical aggressive line based on the immediate d4 push, which is sharp and demands calculation. But the sources also point out that the Italian opening is flexible enough to accommodate more positional players. This brings us to a deliberate shift away from that central aggression and toward the positional d3 structure.
Right, the d3 setup represents a deliberate shift in focus, often chosen in modern play to avoid the hyper-analytical forced lines that come after that immediate d4 push.
So it's a safer option.
It's more solid. Instead of tactical aggression, the d3 structure aims for a more solid positional game. It's often referred to as the managerial approach or the slow cooker method. You're prioritizing piece harmony and long-term maneuvering over an immediate central confrontation.
That's a great analogy. How exactly is the d3 structure achieved, and what's the difference in tempo compared to the classical line?
Typically, after 1 e4, e5-2, nf3, nc6-3, bc4, bc5, white plays 4 d3. This move reinforces the e4 pawn and creates space for the c1 bishop to potentially develop.
Right.
It's often followed by c3 later on, but not to immediately push d4.
So what's the purpose of c3 then?
It's to support the d3 pawn and just secure the center. The plan is fundamentally different. Instead of aggressively forcing d4, white completes all piece development first, often castling quickly, bringing the b1 knight to c3 or d2, and only pushes d4 much later, usually when the position is ripe and the pieces are optimally positioned.
So this keeps the center closed.
It does. It keeps the center closed and the position less chaotic.
If white keeps the center closed and develops slowly, resisting the urge to push d4, where does the initiative come from? I mean, the whole spirit of the Italian opening is supposed to be attacking f7, but this setup seems, well, passive.
The key is that the initiative is shifted from the center to the king side. The d3 structure is all about long-term repositioning of the pieces, particularly a specific, often counterintuitive knight maneuver, ng1, e2, g3.
ng1, e2, g3. That looks like a huge detour. You're moving a knight away from the center using two moves to get it where a single nc3 might have been sufficient in another opening. Why this specific route?
It's all about strategic geometry and leverage. The e2 square clears the d1 h5 diagonal for the queen, and it allows the other knight to come to c3 or d2, avoiding a central traffic jam.
Okay, so it's about piece coordination.
It is, and the ultimate aim is to reposition that knight from g3 to f5. The f5 square becomes a crucial, permanent attacking outpost for kingside assaults, particularly after white has castled kingside. It pressures d6 and h6 and prepares to sacrifice on h7 or g7 if the opportunity arises.
So the positional approach is not about peace. It's about a more surgical, delayed attack. It uses the d3 structure to ensure stability while preparing these specialized, high-leverage kingside assaults later in the middle game.
Exactly. By stabilizing the center first, white creates a position where the attack is less reliant on tactical calculation in the opening and more reliant on executing a long-term plan. This flexibility, allowing white to switch between immediate central violence and deep positional maneuvering, is precisely why the Italian opening has endured the scrutiny of modern engine analysis.
And what about black in this closed environment? Does black gain significant freedom?
Absolutely. Since white keeps the position closed in the d3 setup, black gains flexibility too. Black can choose between strategic pawn advances like d6 or d5, or even playing a6 to prepare for the retreat of the bishop to a7 if white threatens b4. The game becomes less about immediate tactical exchanges and much more about subtle long-term maneuvering, which is a hallmark of Grandmaster chess.
So black has time to refine their structure, maybe prepare a queenside counterattack?
Exactly.
Now let's switch gears back to pure, unadulterated aggression. We saw the delayed d4 thrust in the Giuoco piano, but the source material details the immediate material sacrifice, the Italian gambit.
The Italian gambit, often reached after 3-point BC5, is not for the faint of heart. Here, white plays 4. D4 immediately without the preparation of C3, sacrificing the D4 pawn outright.
So you're just giving up a central pawn on move 4.
On move 4, this sacrifice is made purely for tempo, rapid development, and open lines. It's a commitment to immediate, unbridled chaos and a real test of black's nerve.
When you sacrifice a central pawn this early, you're giving black a material edge right off the bat. How does black usually accept this gift, and what are the consequences for white?
Black has two main ways to accept the pawn: taking with the knight, which is 4 pawn and xd4, or taking with the bishop, 4 pawn bxd4. White's compensation is different in each line, but it's always rooted in time and initiative.
Let's start with 4 bot and xd4. That seems the most sensible. You develop a piece and grab material.
Right. If black takes with the knight, white unleashes the tactical counterpunch, 5 and z5.
Ah, so you trade pawns, but your knight lands on a great square.
A fantastic square. White has instantly traded a central pawn for a direct threat against f7, again hitting that weakest square. The knight on e5 is powerfully centralized and immediately puts black on the defensive. If black tries to defend f7 with 5 and f6, white continues to pile on the psychological and positional pressure with 6b8-6.
b8-6 is a fantastic aggressive move. It attacks the knight on f8, but more importantly, it threatens to eliminate the defender of the king's castling square, the g7 pawn.
Exactly. The source material highlights that 6b8-6 aims to structurally weaken the king's side, disrupting black's castling plans and making any future defense extremely awkward. White continues development quickly, perhaps castling long or short depending on the circumstances, knowing that the developmental lead gives them massive dynamic advantages that far outweigh that single pawn deficit.
So the position is messy, but white is the one asking all the questions.
Precisely. The position is complicated, requiring precise calculation, but white holds the reins of the game.
And what about the other option? 4-point bxd4. Black captures with the bishop, maintaining the knight development.
If black takes with the bishop, 4-point bxd4, white plays 5. qxd4. White regains the material instantly, but the benefit is faster tempo.
The queen comes out early.
Right. The queen is developed early, occupying a dominant central square. White can now castle quickly and benefits immensely from rapid piece development, often bringing the rook to e1 to support the e4 pawn. At this stage, black often only has the bishop in the nc6 developed, while white is prepared to attack immediately down the e-file or via the powerful bishop on c4.
So even though white regains the pawn, the main advantage is the immediate tempo gain and the centralization of the queen, which forces black to react defensively to threats like an immediate d5 push.
That is the consequence of the Italian gambit. It's high risk for white if black defends accurately, but it guarantees a tactical, dynamic game where white's developmental advantage and lead in initiative often prove overwhelming.
So it's about creating problems for your opponent.
Exactly. White specifically aims to disrupt black's pawn structure and coordination. These positions are incredibly sharp and demand that black accurately find the narrow path to safety, which is always difficult under time pressure. The gambit transforms the game instantly into a test of who can handle the tension better.
This theme of sacrificing pawns and development for initiative and attacks on the king is just the core philosophy of the Italian opening. It shows a commitment to controlled, dynamic play.
It really does.
We've established the foundation and the more positional structures, but now we transition from the giuoco piano, the quiet game, to the absolute firestorm that is the two knights defense. This leads to some of the most famous, forced, and aggressive tactical sequences in the entire history of chess.
The two knights defense is black's other primary option against the Italian. Instead of mirroring white's development with 3-point bc5, black plays 3-point in f6.
So attacking the e4 pawn immediately.
This response is more direct and aggressive than the giuoco piano.
By immediately attacking e4, black forces white to make a choice. Defend the pawn with nc3, or just ignore the pawn and launch an immediate, overwhelming attack.
Exactly, defending the pawn with 4, d3, or 4. OO leads to more positional lines, but the two knights defense is best known for the line where white chooses pure aggression, leading directly to the most famous, brutal sequence in the entire opening repertoire.
And that, of course, is the sequence with the memorable, slightly disturbing name.
Yes, the fried liver attack, or figatello attack, an old Italian term meaning cooked liver. It is a humorous yet terrifying name for a sequence that leaves the opponent's king utterly destroyed.
You can't just drop a name like the fried liver attack and not explain it. What is this?
The core idea, consistent with the Italian spirit, is to exploit the f7 weakness immediately.
How does white launch this attack?
After 3 and f6, white responds with the incredibly provocative and challenging move 4 and g5.
That's a weird-looking move, moving a knight to the edge of the board so early.
It's very unusual, an early move in the opening, jumping the knight to the king's side and attacking f7 for the second time, alongside the bishop on c4. The pressure on f7 is immense and immediate. Black's best response, by necessity, is 4.d5, blocking the bishop's diagonal and challenging the center.
Okay, that makes sense.
White then responds with 5, xd5.
And this brings us to the critical trapping moment where black attempts to simplify but walks right into the fire.
The trap lies in black's attempt to retrieve the pawn and simplify the position. If black plays 5 done xd5, anticipating an equal exchange or a quiet continuation, white immediately unleashes the core, devastating sacrifice. 6. Angx f7.
Wow, sacrificing the knight on f7 right onto the king's square, right next to the king. So you just give up a knight for what?
This move sacrifices a minor piece for an overwhelming tactical gain. It immediately creates a fork between the queen on d8 and the rook on h8. Black is essentially forced to capture the knight, 6 takes f7. If black ignores the knight, white captures the queen or the rook and gains massive material, essentially winning the game immediately.
So black has won a knight, but at the catastrophic cost of exposing their king in the absolute center of the board, surrounded by their own pieces that can't even move yet.
That is the essential brutal trade-off. White gave up a minor piece to tear open the center and expose the king to immediate, relentless danger, and the continuation is forced and brutal. White immediately continues the attack with 7qh5 plus steed, delivering a powerful check.
The king has to move, but there's no real safety left, is there? Where can it run?
There are two main forced retreat lines, 7kg6 or 7ke6. The source material highlights 7ke6 as the most common defense because it defends the d5 knight and gets the king away from the immediate h-file pressure.
Okay.
This is where white brings the previously sleeping knight on b1 into the game with 8 and f3.
Wait, 8 and f3. Why not continue checking? Why take the time to develop a new piece when the king is just sitting in the middle of the board?
Because the attack must be sustained by the coordinated efforts of all your pieces. 8. nf3 is a brilliant developing move that accomplishes several goals simultaneously. It attacks the exposed knight on d5, it prevents the king from flaying to f5, and it brings a fresh attacker into the game.
So you're down a piece, but you have this overwhelming attack.
Right. White is still down a piece, but the overwhelming attacking chances and the sheer difficulty for black to coordinate a defense where every single move has to be a forced defensive move makes the compensation massive.
If I'm playing black, what is the single most important defensive concept I must know to survive this attack? Is it even possible?
It is, but it's difficult. The central defensive concept for black revolves around bringing the c8 bishop into the game quickly, often by playing moves like pawn c6 or eventually taut f5 to try and secure the king. However, the pressure remains relentless. The source material details how white often continues with moves like 9, 0-0, castling and bringing the rook to e1, or even 9, re1.
So the attack just keeps coming.
The point is that black's king is permanently unsafe, and white's next 5-10 moves are all dedicated to attack, while black must dedicate all of their moves to defense. The analysis shows that black has something like a 2% winning margin in this line, compared to white's 35% win rate. A massive testament to the power of initiative over material.
The fried liver attack is a masterclass in the Italian openings philosophy. Development is good, but sacrificing material to guarantee exposure and initiative is better.
It is, and it serves as a warning.
Yeah.
If you play the two knights defense, you must be prepared for this sequence, and you have to know the narrow path to survival.
We've seen white's willingness to sacrifice a knight to expose the king. Now we move to perhaps the most fascinating part of the sources. A highly specific, rapid checkmate trap that black can use against an overly greedy or unsuspecting white player early in the Italian opening.
That's right.
It's a trap so effective it intentionally violates opening principles just to set the bait.
This sequence, which is almost comical in its simplicity and effectiveness against the uninitiated, starts with black committing a deliberate opening violation, moving the same piece twice and sacrificing a central pawn.
Okay, so what are the setup moves for this deviation?
We start with the Italian opening moves. 1, e4, e5, 2, nf3, nc6, 3, bc4. Black then plays the aggressive deviation 3-nd4. The knight on c6 moves again to d4.
Wait, 3-nd4. That breaks, like every opening rule. You're moving the same piece twice and just giving up the e5 pawn for free. Why would black ever consider this outside of a clear, forced win?
That is the genius of the trap. It relies entirely on white's human instinct for material greed. Black is basically saying, I'm breaking the rules, but I'm setting a hook that is too tempting to ignore.
And the bait is the e5 pawn.
Exactly. If white, seeing a free pawn on e5, succumbs to that material temptation and plays the most natural, greedy move 4, and psi5, the trouble begins immediately.
If white plays 4, and psi5, black instantly unleashes the attack with
What you g5?
And that's a double attack.
That's the key. The queen hits two major targets simultaneously. It threatens the e5 knight, forcing it to move or be defended, and more critically, it threatens the g2 pawn, which, if captured, immediately wins the rook on h1. It's a double threat that forces white's hand and requires immediate tactical precision.
The source material then details the continuation if white decides to double down on the material gain, trying to turn the tables with a fried liver-like attack by playing 5 and xf7.
This is white's final mistake in this line. White attempts to gain material and fork the queen and rook on h8, but black is already 2 moves ahead in the sequence. Black continues relentlessly with 5.qxg2. Now the rook on h1 is definitely under attack, and the threat of mate is looming.
So white has gained some material, but is now faced with immediate force lines that lead to mate or ruinous material loss.
Precisely. The material count is irrelevant here. It's all about the exposed king and the incoming threats. If white attempts to gain the material advantage by ignoring the immediate mate threat, they lose instantly. This is where the sequence becomes forced.
And there are 2 main lines here, right? Depending on what white does.
We have 2 major forced lines here after 5.qxg2. The first is the quickest mate, where white tries to defend the rook on h1.
Okay, let's look at that attempt to save the rook. White plays 6, rf1.
If white plays 6, rf1, the checkmate is accelerated dramatically. Black plays 6, qis be4 plus bell, forcing the white king into the center or forcing a blocking move. Now, white has 2 main ways to block the check and survive another move.
Let's take option A. White blocks the check with the bishop. 7, b2.
This is the famous crushing line. If 7b2, black delivers the forced checkmate with 7.nf3 shag.
Mate in 7 move.
Mate in 7 moves, starting from the deviation 3.nd4. The key brilliant detail here is that the a2 bishop is pinned by the queen on e4 and cannot capture the knight on f3. The king has no escape squares, and the entire white position just collapses. This specific sequence is attributed to the English grandmaster Henry Blackburn, who popularized it as a way to punish lazy development.
A truly beautiful trap that relies entirely on white's greed and the failure to recognize that pin on move 7. Now, what if white attempts to block with the queen instead of the bishop? 7, q2.
If white plays 7, q2 to block the check, black simply plays 7.ngai2. Black wins the queen in an exchange, leading to an easily winning endgame. In this variation, white has to realize that the primary goal is king safety, not material retention. The material advantage that white had tried to build is instantly nullified.
Okay, now let's look at the second main option after 5qxg2. Instead of defending the h1 rook, white decides to gain material and plays 6, angx h8, taking black's rook on h8.
This is the second path to ruin. White is up a knight and a rook for 2 pawns, which looks great statically, but the queen is now centralized and active. Black continues with 6qx h1 plus gebe, delivering a check.
The king is forced to a corner.
Right. The white king has nowhere to run but to the back rank. White must play 7, bf1, blocking the check. But now the queen returns to the central battle with 7-2 by c4 plus bay, attacking the exposed king once more.
And again, the sources show that if white tries to hold on to the material with 8, q2, black simply plays 8.n2, winning the queen in the game.
And if white attempts the more defensive 8, b2, trying to hold the position together, black continues the attack relentlessly by bringing the bishop out quickly with 8.bc5. This development move continues the pressure, specifically targeting f2 and pressuring the centralized king. Modern analysis confirms that the engine can only delay mate by a few moves at this point, showing white has no meaningful defense left.
So the attack is just too strong.
The coordinated pieces arrive too quickly. The source material even shows a deeper continuation after 8, b2 bc5. If white attempts to gain space with 9d3, chasing the queen, black has 9.nf3 plus fair. That is a check, forcing the king to f1, followed by 10qh4, threatening mate on f2 and h3.
The entire continuation just underscores the power of this nd4 trap. It forces white into lines where a small material advantage is instantly sacrificed for an overwhelming game-winning initiative against the exposed king.
It is a perfect, dramatic illustration of how violating opening principles can be strategically justified if it leads to a forced tactical win based on the opponent's overconfidence or material greed.
What stands out to me is how easily an opening praised for its solidity and strategic depth, the Italian opening, can devolve into such pure tactical violence. It shows that even the oldest, most analyzed structures still hold hidden traps and lethal sacrifices.
If we connect all these threads to the bigger picture, the Italian opening is clearly far more than just the three initial moves, 1 point E4, E5, 2 point NF3, NC6, 3 point BC4. It is a commitment to specific strategic ideals,
Mm.
rapid development, unwavering central control, and a constant readiness for tactical sacrifice to gain time and initiative.
We've seen the sheer variety within this single opening family. Whether white chooses the positional D3 structure, aiming for that subtle NG1, E2, G3 maneuver in the F5 outpost, a strategy built on patience and future strikes.
Right, the slow cooker method.
Or the highly aggressive D4 pushes in the Italian gambit, or even the devastating tactical lines like the fried liver attack. The initial choice dictates the strategic landscape entirely. It teaches you that a single opening can contain multiple strategic philosophies.
And that strategic landscape is consistently characterized by a willingness to challenge the material balance. We discussed how, in the Giuoco Piano, white sacrifices development for the ideal center. In the Italian gambit, white sacrifices a pawn for open lines and tempo. And in the fried liver, white sacrifices a knight to expose the king.
A recurring theme.
A very consistent theme. These examples show that material is merely a tool, a means to an end, secondary to achieving initiative and king safety.
For you, the learner, this opening is invaluable for developing pattern recognition. The Italian game, especially its open positions and force sequences like the fried liver and the ND4 trap, trains your eye to spot tactical possibilities and teaches you the art of controlled risk.
It really does.
It forces both players to think critically about the difference between static material advantage and dynamic compensation. It pushes you to ask, am I ready to trade a knight for a permanent attack against the king?
And this raises an important question when we saw throughout all the variations we analyzed today. White and black are repeatedly willing to sacrifice material pawns or even minor pieces to gain the initiative or open up the opponent's king. Consider this. What is the true functional value of a piece if, by sacrificing it, you can guarantee the exposure and eventual checkmate of the opposing king?
Right.
Is the material advantage always the most important factor in the opening phase? Or is the relentless pursuit of initiative and the coordination of your pieces the true defining feature of chess mastery?
Something to ponder as you look at your next game and decide whether you want to play the quiet game or launch the fried liver. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the Italian opening.